vitesse dans votre esprit quand vous avez fait cette enquête?
Well, I think that maybe the misunderstanding of Thoughtprints, maybe there's a misunderstanding when it comes to Thoughtprints. It's merely another way of explaining how one connects an individual to evidence. In other words, there's nothing esoteric, there's nothing metaphysical about my term Thoughtprints. I think I talk about Thoughtprints being the arches and the loops and the whirls of the mind that connect potentially connect us to a crime, a person, a location, whatever. So when I talk about Thoughtprints in Black Dahlia Avenger, what I'm doing is I'm trying to link connections to George Hodel to the crime. Now, fingerprints, there are different points. You need 10, in America, you need at least 12 points to make a positive identification on a fingerprint. Here in Europe, I think it's much higher. It's perhaps 20 or 30 points, as it should be. But at any rate, a minimum of 12. So I liken these Thoughtprints that I describe as to points in a fingerprint. By themselves, they really mean nothing. Together en masse, they have the potential of making the linkage. I talk about an example of the Thoughtprints is when I'm interviewing Tamar, my half-sister, the victim of the incest, about the crime or about her memory of her life at the Franklin house. She mentioned, of course, she didn't know at the time that I'm investigating George Hodel. What I wanted to do was get everything I could without alerting her. So I discovered this incredible amount of information she had. And of course, she was older, so she had a better memory than I of much more. Anyway, she says to me, well, we used to walk around nude a lot. There was a lot of nudity and sunbathing at the Franklin house. And for my 11th birthday, Father gave me, I took a doll, which my mother had given me, and I took it to Dad to name it. He always came up with these great names, for everything. Dorero. My brother, his middle name was Dionysius. I mean, he always came up with something rather unusual to offer. And she said, he looked at me and kind of smiled and said, why don't you name it Elizabeth Ann? She thought, well, okay. That's not a very cool name, but all right. Well, now, this was shortly after she thought about 1947. Well, she didn't know the name of the victim, Elizabeth Ann. Actually, her middle name wasn't Ann, but at any rate, she's sure about the Elizabeth, thinks he said Elizabeth Ann. At any rate, she thought that was strange, but let it go. Well, that in itself does not mean anything, does it? But it's interesting in viewing the case. Let's look at it as just one little print. It's just to add to the pool. It's interesting, and there is a link to Elizabeth. Why would he, of all the names to pick? So that's kind of an example. Another example I give is in the mailings of the Black Dahlia Avenger that he sends in. A number of those. One of them, he says, I think he says, going to give myself up, man killer says. He's writing headlines. I mean, a number of those he's actually writing a headline. He's not, this is not how people talk. This is not how they communicate. And of course, Father was a journalist in his youth. He was experienced in writing copy. And again, 2 or 3 of these, in fact, the police came out and said they suspected they were phonies. They were probably sent in by journalists because they sounded like a journalist writing. Again, Dad was a journalist. That doesn't mean itself, but it's one more point. So maybe you need 20 points or more to have weight. But that's sort of the spirit of what I'm talking about as far as Thoughtprints. Is that clear?